Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Uh, Fun David Stone Martin t-shirt today. It's Thursday morning. It's a very foggy day outside, as you can well see. A lot of gray, and that's Minnesota in the wintertime. A lot of seasonal depression happens here in the upper Midwest because of the long winters with the limited sunlight and the early sunrise. Late sunrise, early sunset, short days. Days are already getting longer. But we had 54 degrees here yesterday, which for January is pretty unheard of. I like to say, by the way, that Charlie Shavers, man, Shavers grabs me by the throat all the time. He's got so much soul. For early January doesn't bode well that we're getting 50-degree temperatures here in Minnesota. But it's actually February 1st today, I guess. But just going to recap stuff I played again this last week in the cafe. I meant to get to this episode this week. I had a doctor's appointment Monday, Tuesday. I got a really good report from my doctor. My blood pressure and my blood sugars and all these things are getting down into normal, healthy ranges. My weight loss has been gone well. So congratulations to me. It's nice when you go see your doctor and she's got nothing but good things to tell you and positive reports, and she doesn't need to see you for 3-4 months. She said 6 months probably would have been okay. So, I do feel pretty good about that. Shavers is just killing me right now. But, great record I'm playing, which I'll show you here in a minute. First, I want to talk to you about the Staple Singers. Not really a jazz group, of course, very much a soul group. LA soul, West Coast, Pop Staples, Mavis Staples. I can't remember if it was Pops and his wife and his 2 daughters, or if they were all his daughters. And it actually looks like it's 2 guys and 2 girls there, so maybe they're all his kids. That was usually 3 women. It is usually 3 women. That definitely is 2 dudes on this first one. And then we got Staples Singers. This is from 1970 as well. I remember finding that at a record show and being like, oh, sweet. Cool cover. Be What You Are. This one's from 73. This is just a collection. Great stuff on the Stax label, which was out of Memphis. Stax Volt was one of the great soul black race labels of the late 60s, early 70s. This is probably their most popular record and the one that has the most legacy today. Staple Singers, Be Altitude, Respect Yourself, and I'll Take You There. Those are pretty big songs that you hear in film soundtracks today and have really stayed part of the pop lexicon. Foil cover, which is really indicative of the 70s and how we love all things that were foil. And then this record here came out on a different label. It comes out on Curtom, which Curtom is Curtis Mayfield's label. Movie starring Sidney Poitier, Bill Cosby, and Jimmy Walker, Dynamite. Let's Do It Again. There's Cosby and Poitier and Jimmy Walker. Jimmy Walker was from Good Times. Dynamite. But Let's Do It Again was a huge hit. And it's been sampled in hip-hop a few times. And next to Respect Yourself and I'll Take You There, Let's Do It Again was probably their 3 number 1 hits, I think, if I remember. And they had other minor hits on the R&B charts. We're never a huge crossover group. And again, that's the difference between what part of America knows your music. If you're an R&B act, you pretty much were known in the black community and people who like to dance. White girls who like to dance with black men. A lot of white men had no idea about songs that were R&B hits, 60s, 70s to the present. Conversely, if you cross over to the pop charts, like a Beyonce did, like a Tina Turner did, like a Whitney Houston, Commodores, Brick House, Lady, like 3 Times a Lady, like those songs crossed into the pop charts. And the difference in recognition in white America between songs that charted on the pop charts versus the R&B charts. As a DJ, I can tell you firsthand, it's like night and day. Most white Americans think of Rick James as being Super Freak and that guy that MC Hammer sampled. That's the extent of their knowledge of Rick James, and that Dave Chappelle made a lot of fun of him. I'm Rick James, bitch. I mean, that shit was hilarious. I got to give it up to him. Charlie Murphy, rest in peace. Great stuff, man. The Prince one was great too. But I mean, there's a whole lot more to Rick James than Super Freak. A whole lot more. Mary Jane will tell you. And so in the black community, they almost shun the stuff that crosses over too much. Ask Whitney Houston about that. Bobby Brown. If you cross over too much, it's really hard to maintain your credibility in the black community. And certain artists could do it. I mean, Prince was never really rejected by the black community, even though he was very much a white, targeting audience, musician-making guy. I mean, he made music for black people that was called The Time. Those are funky dance records. You can dance to a lot of those Time songs. But they didn't chart on the pop charts, they charted on the R&B charts. You know what I mean? And the difference in what people know, I mean, it's strange. And a stark reflection of just how dissected and divided we are when you look at those charts. And that's current to the present. I mean, I don't follow them super close at this moment, but the few times those charts diverge and white and black America are dancing together, great efforts are made, great efforts are made to subvert that. The backlash against disco was as much about the open sexuality and interracial connections that were happening as it was about any kind of music production. Or someone toasted the sweater mug the other day, so here it is again. Cable knit coffee mug. But a lot of America, conservative America, needs that divide to exist to keep the poor white man feeling like they're somebody. And like disco, those charts are very interwoven. Most of the big disco hits were R&B hits and pop hits. I mean, ask the Village People, ask the Beatles. I mean, there's so many examples of those songs that crossed over. Big, ain't no stopping us. I mean, they had come together. And there was a racial unity that was coming from those mixed dance floors. There was an embrace of open sexualities and different genders, identities, and I mean the gay community, the black community, the Hispanic community, and the white community. We might all be on the same dance floor. We might not be shaking and jiving together, but we still on the same dance floor. And people cross lines that they probably wouldn't have crossed just because they were being exposed to and being comfortable around other walks of life, which is how it should be. I mean, this fear we have of so much of this world, it's the opposite of freedom. I don't know how many times I got to say it. And the chances are if you have freedom emblazoned across the back of your pickup truck, you are all for suppressing most people's freedoms. Is that what that word means? I mean, look it up. It's ironic. But Staple Singers, great stuff. And a great example of a group that charted consistently on the R&B charts, but didn't cross over to the pop charts a whole lot. And so they become kind of a forgotten, eclipsed group that, I mean, soul purists obviously will know, and the black community will recognize a lot of these songs. But in a sense, a couple of those tracks have made it into the pop lexicon through film soundtracks and showing up, trying to represent that 70s vibe when they want to have that in the film. But it's kind of weird how narrow that bandwidth is in terms of songs that they use to embody a sound in an era. A lot of times I've heard Brick by the song Daz by the group Brick from Atlanta when they want to embody a 70s pimp. I mean, Superfly, there's certain songs that just, Pusher Man, certain songs that just really emblazon that era and are used almost ad nauseum. And a lot of the flesh of that time has totally been forgotten. Just a few skeletal remains of the great soul funk in the disco era. And as many people as hate disco, I mean, it's really stupid. Some of the best produced music ever, music by producers, really for the first time, where they were actually putting their names on the project. They weren't always singing or even playing, but I mean, a lot of times they were big parts of the playing production. I mean, McFadden and Whitehead were huge instrumental parts of the production team at Philadelphia Soul. And so it's really some fantastic music with great, precise arrangements and really well produced recordings. Dance songs from that era are some of the best sounding songs of that time frame. And Barry White, was one of the real antecedents of the disco sound. Love's Orchestra and some of those early Barry White tunes, man, they really are the prototype for what disco was to become. Even My First, Last, and Everything, and I Can't Get Enough of Your Love. Like, these are songs that it's really crazy. The strings in the Love Symphony Orchestra that Barry White was arranging and putting out there is a real harbinger of what's to come in the disco sound. And Barry White, if you don't like disco, you're saying you don't like Barry White on some level. And that's, if you don't like Barry White, I mean, what are you doing? And Barry's more than just a disco guy, of course. Some of his songs are pretty straight R&B. And I mean, say a song like "Playing Your Game," baby, from like '75 or '6. That whole record's fantastic. But your sweetness is my weakness. I mean, sometimes I miss the R&B stuff that I DJ'd for so many years in the black community. I really got to know that stuff so well. And I once in a while will dabble and play it here for people, and there's a room full of people. And God, it's just so fun. And it's just discouraging how little white America knows a lot of it. I mean, if you're in the city and you go to clubs and are part of retro dance parties, and I mean, we're getting further and further away from that time. That's part of the issue too. Is like, we're 1970s now is a long time ago, 40, 50 years ago. And so it means a lot of those songs, to be really remembered by the people who lived them, those people are in their 60s and 70s, you know. And I guess I'm going to digress at this point, but it's just interesting how much it reflects the racial divide in this country still to this day. TLC and Beyonce and Destiny's Child, some of that stuff in the 90s. Prince and Michael. Prince and Michael were the two guys in the 80s that got on MTV in the 83, 84, and really started reintegrating R&B back into the pop charts. But when the disco movement dies and gets killed, there's a number of years there, 80, 81, 82, and 83, where a lot of the R&B charts, there's some fantastic dance songs there that white folks know next to nothing about in this country. SOS Band was, I mean, they had some fantastic songs from that era. Cameo. I mean, it really took Prince and Michael to really get Purple Rain and Billie Jean, and I mean, that stuff kind of got on MTV and got into circulation, and the watches and views for that were insane, and kind of connected white America with black music again on some level. And disco on some level also didn't die. A lot of it just went underground into the Detroit, Chicago house scenes, and those producers were still making music. They just didn't call it disco. But I mean, there's songs from that era that are kind of R&B songs that are straight still disco songs, and there's a lot of early house stuff that's hard to distinguish from what the disco beat is, and which that's fantastic. But we're going to move away from R&B at this point. We're going to move back to jazz. I showed you a couple of Ethel Ennis records last week on RCA, and again, these are kind of sweet lexicon RCA recordings meant for a major label, and it kind of puts her in a different light. And I've often talked about how a singer's at the behest of the label she's recording for, or he's recording for, and that's often going to dictate what that record sounds like. And for most singers, especially jazz singers, if you want to get a great idea what they're really capable of, you want to find their small label recordings. Because those are going to usually be with some great jazz musicians in a trio or a quartet setting with some nice muted trumpet, soft minimalist backgrounds, not huge string ensembles and big arranged horn sections. I mean, that's the product of a much bigger budget and a much bigger label with much bigger producers who are putting their stamp and their ego on something. I mean, a producer in a jazz context can often be overbearing. And a lot of the same producers who made fantastic disco stuff in a jazz setting. I mean, Quincy Jones even. I'll take Quincy Jones's R&B production over a lot of his jazz arrangements, which ends up being a lot of his stamp over top of the improvisers and between the improvisers. And I like arranged horns, but I mean, they're certainly better in a dance disco setting. And again, jazz was a dance music for a generation, so it does. I do understand it, but Ellington's arrangements are beyond reproach. I mean, there's never a bad Ellington arrangement. But here's a great example of, I mean, Ethel Ennis, and I've showed you this record several times over the years. This is a small label, Jubilee, in New York in the 50s. Herb Abramson was the founder, worked with the Erdigans at Atlantic for a while, went his own way. And her voice on this is black, urban jazz, nightclub, dirty basement, scandal lit. It's fantastic. It's dirty. It's scrubby. It smells a little bit like cigarettes and stale weed. I mean, this is good stuff. And much as I enjoyed those RCA records, it's interesting, again, to play the Jubilee, just hear how different it is. Speaking of different but still fun, Helen O'Connell, Green Eyes, which is a great song, and I also love her version of Amapola on here, the Pretty Little Poppy. And if I recall, she sang with the Dorseys, if I remember. And this was a Marion Evans and his orchestra. There were so many white big band orchestras in the 50s that are pretty much forgotten today. But, I mean, I've always loved the song Green Eyes. I like the cover. It's on the Vic label, which was an RCA offshoot to put some interesting jazz titles on that would kind of help the consumer know where to find jazzier stuff on the RCA canon in the late 50s, early 60s. You wanted to find the Vic titles. And the VIK, that's good stuff. There's a lot of really good stuff on Vic. And not all RCA stuff got on there. I mean, I don't think any of the Rollins stuff had Vic releases, but I mean, her versions of these songs, again, they're sacchared. It's middle white America kind of stuff a little bit, but there's actually some pretty good swing on there, some pretty good playing, and I actually enjoyed that record a lot. And I guessed actually pulled that off the shelf the other day. I'm like, oh, okay, I actually like that record quite a lot. Moving on, one of the pieces of meat I really want to bite into today on this episode is Illinois Jacquet. And we've talked Illinois Jacquet numerous times, of course. The great Texas Tenorman. One of the great bridges in this music between the Ben Webster, Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins generation and the John Coltrane, Stanley Turrentine, Sonny Rollins generation. Dexter Gordon and Illinois Jacquet are kind of the two guys that bridge that era through bebop into the new hard bop, post bop era. Of course, big roots in the big band era, these guys. And Illinois Jacquet was always a kind of zone, a lot of real shout, jump blues and Texas barbecue in his sound, grit, tonality. Just a fantastic player. And I've told you before how the Texas Tenorman, part of their stamp was to use a reed from a saxophone one size bigger than you played. So if you played an alto, you used a tenor reed. If you played a tenor, you used a baritone reed, and so on. And it just gives them a thicker, warmer sound. I mean, it's just lush. And Hal Singer playing right there, just beautiful. But Illinois Jacquet is just such an overlooked icon today. Norman Granz from the Verve label knew right away that he was the guy that he was targeting, and he brings Jacquet in. He records quite a bit of stuff in the early 50s for Verve before going to other smaller labels, including Prestige and the Roulette. He makes a couple of great records for. But his work for Norman Granz is really outstanding stuff. This is Illinois Jacquet and his orchestra featuring Count Basie. And if I recall, this is a collection of stuff. No, it's just actually a Clef reissue. And Clef was Norman Granz's first label. It was Clef 701, got reissued as Verve 8085 when he reissued all the Verve stuff. He reissued all the Clef stuff in the Verve 8000 sequence. So 8085 was the same as Clef 701. I think it's the same cover, David Stowe Martin cover. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful session. Fantastic playing. Charles Thompson's on this on the piano, Sir Charles Thompson. Hank Jones on the organ, which is pretty interesting to hear. It's just fantastic. Shadow Wilson's on the drums, Al Lucas on the bass, Joe Sonacor on the guitar. There's a separate session where it's a smaller group. It looks like it actually comes from 3 sessions. So perhaps this is even from the early 50s. But I don't think it had a 10-inch release because I would have had that on there if it did. It was just Clef 701. This other Jacquet record I want to show you here. This was Clef 702, Verve 8086. Another Greg David Stowe Martin cover. And this one has Russell Jacquet on it, who is, and Matthew Gee, who's a fantastic bone player, played with Ellington and a few others. And I think Basie as well. But Russell Jacquet is obviously Illinois Jacquet's brother. And Illinois Jacquet has far more fame today than Russell Jacquet does. And neither of them have enough acclaim today. I mean, but Illinois Jacquet's a far more household name than obviously his brother Russell, who was a great trumpet player. And he jumped out at me several times on these sessions. I just say, man, this kid can play. He's a grown man. I don't mean to call him kid, but and why Russell Jacquet is so overlooked, especially with his name of his brother, it's a little bit of a mystery to me. Maybe someone out there can tell me why Russell Jacquet never got. And he doesn't get a lot of recordings as a leader, but he does record quite a bit as a sideman. And he's on a lot of Illinois recordings in the 50s. I pulled out some stuff from Verve the other day, and in that chunk was also some great Phillips stuff. One of the great white tenormen of this era, who was a fantastic player, participated in most of Norman Granz's Jazz at the Philharmonic recordings from the late 40s, early 50s. So he's playing with Bird and Dizzy and just Bill Harris, all the greats. This recording here, fantastic David Stone Martin cover, just beautiful stuff. And Flip Phillips is a wonderful Ben Webster protege. I mean, he's got his own sound, but he's got a lot of breathiness and earthiness. Just love his tonality and his sincerity, and he seems a very contemplative player. And even this picture of him here will kind of define you, what kind of player he is. Part of how you see personality in someone is looking at pictures of them, especially in that era. You can't watch video. But this record here that I showed you first has Bill Harris, the great Harry Sweets Edison, the great Ray Brown, one of the great bass players of all time, the great Hank Jones, Detroit native, Jones Brothers, one of the great piano players of that era, Billy Bauer, a fantastic guitar player, again a white guy now, and Buddy Rich, a white drummer. So you have a real mix of race and talent and from all over the country, and it's just part of that legacy of Norman Granz is there's so much talent that when he puts together a session, he's like, I want Sweets on this with you. I want Bill Harris playing the trombone. Let's get Ray Brown on the bass, of course. Buddy Rich, we'll put Billy Bauer on the guitar. And let's get Hank Jones on the piano. And if you're Flip Phillips, you're like, yeah, cool. Sign me up for that. Then you got another Flip Phillips here. This one's with Howard McGee and the great Benny Green on the trombone. This is a Japanese recording of it. I would like to find an old Verve at some point. It's out there. I haven't had the money, of course, as of late. Howard McGee was one of the great bebop trumpet players. Came out of the swing era into the bebop. He was there at Minton's in the early days with the guys like Monk and Charlie Christian and Parker. I mean, he's really a stalwart of the bebop. Seeing Howard McGee doesn't get the recordings on the nameplate labels, so he often gets kind of forgotten and overlooked today. But Howard McGee's work at Bethlehem is fantastic. I mean, you gotta love those records he did there. Now this is Chico O'Farrell, and again, one of Norman Granz's legacies is Latin jazz. People forget how much Latin jazz was Dizzy Gillespie and Manteca and Chano Pozo, and it was Norman Granz that really was proliferating the sound of Latin jazz in the early 50s, way before the Bossa Nova, way before jazz was popularized, way before your Stan Getzes and those guys that were saying, yeah, let's do some Latin influenced stuff. You have Norman Granz embracing it. And Chico O'Farrell, fantastic composer, arranger. This is a compilation of two 10 inches. And also was Clef 699, as well as Clef 132, which was a 10 inch. And there's another 10 inch on here as well that this is coming from. But just fantastic, Latin influenced. And if I remember one of the 10 inches on there is less Latin than the other. A couple Blue Note things I listened to early in the week. Freddie Red, The Shades of Red, fantastic piano player, fairly overlooked, with the great young Louis Hayes from Detroit, Paul Chambers on the bass, young Tina Brooks and Jackie McLean. And so you have Brooks and McLean who like to play together, who give this record some edge. But, I mean, Freddie Red's just a wonderful, melodic, harmony-centered player with Chambers and Hayes rounding out the rhythm section. A Three Sounds record that I've played a lot. On Green Dolphin Street, it's one of my favorites on this. Three Sounds, The Moods, number 4044. Probably puts it 5960. Cool cover. Bit of a different look for Reed Miles at the time. I mean, I'm a huge Three Sounds fan. Andrew Simpkins and Bill Dowdy on bass and drums. Fantastic Gene Harris on the piano. These records just are fun. They cook. They're absolutely great coffee shop fodder. They're meant for those who don't have a huge palate for jazz. You will soak those up, but you'll get some real substance from them. Flight to Jordan, the great Duke Jordan here, with young Dizzy Reese, Stanley Turrentine, Reggie Workman, Art Taylor. This is some classic Blue Note. Again, a Japanese pressing. A tough record to come by. I've listened to this record dozens and dozens of times. It's really a fantastic recording. And to hear Dizzy Reese and Stanley Turrentine trading licks, it's really high mark stuff. What we're listening to right now, Blue Stompin' by the great house singer, who's a very overlooked player, with the great Charlie Shavers on the trumpet. Shavers doesn't get a lot of recordings as a leader, but he's one of the best trumpet players of this era. He can embody Louis Armstrong, he can embody Roy Eldridge, he can embody Dizzy Gillespie and imitate all three of them, but he also has his own sound. He's really a melodic-centered player. I'm a huge fan of Charlie Shavers. I've often talked about his work, and I just think he's one of the great players of this era or any other era. And a lot of times, I mean, as much as I like Hal Singer's tenor playing on this, it's really Shavers that keeps jumping out at me. This is Prestige number 7153, making it probably 1962 or 3. O.C. Johnson, Wendell Marshall, fantastic. Ray Bryant on the piano, and Ray Bryant really gives this session some gospel swing in a lot of places. The great Shirley Scott, one of the great females in jazz. She was a very persistent woman who stayed on the scene for literally decades. Worked a lot with Stanley Turrentine. They, in fact, were married for a number of years. This is a trio setting with George Duvivier and Arthur Edgehill. I love her RCA work. I like it more than I like her Impulse stuff. Her Impulse stuff tends to be bigger arrangements and a little bit more oversight by the producers. And her stuff at Prestige is kind of more stripped down, black, gospel, soul jazz music. It's fantastic. Coleman Hawkins, Hawk Eyes. And guess who also stars on this record? Charlie Shavers. And again, Shavers was often signed to kind of smaller labels, so he often couldn't get much recognition or leadership on bigger labels in jazz like Prestige or Blue Note. But he does show up as a sideman here and there. Hawkins with Shavers with Tiny Grimes on the guitar, who I love. Ray Bryant again on the piano, George Duvivier and O.C. Johnson. Solid recording. Probably 7156, probably from 62 or 3, I'm guessing again. Doesn't say. Love this recording. I love Coleman Hawkins. Of course, his nickname was the Bean. One of the great progenitors of the tenor saxophone. Probably the guy who puts the tenor saxophone on the map. And just a wonderful lyrical player. Red in Bluesville. The great Red Garland. Prestige number 7157. And Red has an interesting history. He, of course, was with Miles Davis, 1954, 1955, 56, 57. And then Miles, rather unceremoniously, replaces him with Wynton Kelly. Red did have a drug problem and was showing up late, but working for Miles was always a tough jacket to wear. And he fires Wynton Kelly not long after that, replaces him with Bill Evans, and Wynton Kelly comes back, and then Victor Feldman comes in. Feldman doesn't want to tour with Miles, and eventually he finds Herbie Hancock, who's young enough to be bridled by the difficult Miles Davis. But, I mean, Red Garland's one of my fantastic players, a great balladeer, great storyteller. He's one of those guys who'll put you on your knee and tell you the songs and the stories of jazz and folklore that need to be told. Red in Bluesville, fantastic album cover. Just classic Prestige era, early 60s. I mean, Prestige was smart. They're like, you know, this guy has got some fame with Miles. Let's give him his own contract. Let him record here for our label. And last, I want to show you this Shirley Scott record with the great Eddie Davis. And that's Eddie Lockjaw Davis, who records with King and records on a number of labels over the years. But Lockjaw really comes to his own here at Prestige. He does a lot of stuff with Johnny Griffin. But I love his work on his own, too, because you really hear his lyricism and his gospel soul and his flirtatious nature. Eddie Davis is a lot of fun. And he's a cheeky player. He's a loose player. It's very much off the seat of his pants and flying off the cuff. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of pre-arranged, pre-rehearsed lines and expressions. It all feels very immediate with Eddie Lockjaw. And that's part of what I love about Lockjaw. Is some of the players, from Oscar Peterson even to Johnny Griffin, you feel like you're hearing some of these phrases over and over, some of these patterns are repeating, and they're just certain things that they've gotten real comfortable with over the years. And a freestyle MC is the same way. They'll repeat certain lines and rhymes over and over. And there's some players who are just so immediate that there's never any kind of canned or rehearsed parts. And I get that from Lockjaw Davis. It feels very much open. And where am I at right now in my conversation with myself? Monk is that way. Monk never really feels like he's giving you something that was effortless and easy because that was what I remember to do and I know it'll fit there. It always feels like I'm just like tinkling in a kind of open thought pattern from where I'm actually at in my life today, which is a different approach. You know what I mean? It takes some listening to a guy to get a feel for that. And both have their place. And if you play at some of the tempos that some of those guys played at, like Oscar Peterson, a guy like Johnny Griffin, those guys play at lightning fast tempo. So it's probably important to have some well-rehearsed phrasing that you remember and know. And to know some of your scales and how you want to interlope and dance with those and make them sound. But again, it's a different approach than a guy who's just off flying from the seat of his pants, expressing the shit that's going in his life today and how he feels about it. And it comes off different once you've listened to a record or an artist enough. And Lockjaw is probably one of the best at just having a conversation with you. I mean, I don't have the same conversation with you tomorrow that I'm going to have today. It's always going to be a little different. It's always going to come from a different place. And frankly, someone who has the same conversation with you every day, that's pretty interesting. So, just a good recap of what I've been playing the last week. I wanted to make this episode, like I said, a couple days ago. But I've got a lot of stuff going with catching up on paperwork and doctor's appointments. And my wife showed up on Monday to grab some stuff. And I made a weird headspace. She's going to treatment soon, which is great. I'm happy to hear that. But she's got a long road back, and God knows if we can ever patch and mend our fences. But anyway, y'all be blessed. Y'all be safe. Please support the channel. Patreon, YouTube, thanks. If you want to send me money through PayPal, there's a link to that in the page below. All that helps right now because the cafe is scraping by. And it's tough these months. It's winter. It's cold. Roads aren't always great. We've actually been pretty lucky so far with roads this year, but anybody who wants to help support the channel, please do. We need that support. And it's not just going into my pocket. It's helping me keep this jazz cafe open and have it be a resource for everybody who wants to come and study the canon. Because the canon is in this room. Especially the canon from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. If you want to get to know that and see that, look it over and get to know, have some perspective on it and see its chronology and its lineage and its influence, this is the place to do that. And so we do need your support. Please help support the channel if you can. Y'all be safe. Y'all be blessed. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.